We are talking about the series Knightfall, which is a 10-episode series by history, obviously the same people who brought us the very popular series Vikings. Now, with the success of that series and obviously the massive success of Game of Thrones, obviously we've seen a few of these type of kind of medieval kind of dramas kind of come out. We've obviously had Britannia recently, we've got Knightfall, got Lost Kingdom, etc. So there's a bunch of these that have come out now. So Knightfall details the story of the Templar Knights, and these are essentially warrior monks, for lack of a better word. And it really focuses on this one character called Landry, who is our central character. And the whole point of this series is really kind of around the chalice of Christ, basically. And we have a few sort of characters, but it's basically trying to kind of get hold of this particular goblet, basically, which ultimately will lead the Christians back into the kind of the Holy Land. The first episode starts in the Middle East. Basically, we get a great kind of sort of battle scene there, and I've got to say, probably the first episode certainly is the strongest in regards to visual flair. There's some kind of great little kind of like Iron Man shots where we see the camera and the helmets and stuff like that. So that was all pretty good. I do have some massive problems with this series, though. This is no way in kind of like to the level of Vikings. On an aesthetic level, I would say it's fantastic. It looks great. The armor looks great. The settings looks great. Obviously, everyone's kind of dressed appropriately and stuff like that. But the main issue here is it simply isn't as interesting as Vikings or Game of Thrones. But we're going to relate it to Vikings more than anything else, because that is another history show. And that's down to the characters. Our main character, Landry, unfortunately is a bit of a dumbass, if we're completely honest, and makes bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. And also he's up to something, without kind of spoiling it, with a woman, which is pretty low and a bad thing. But we kind of meant to sympathise with him. Now, I don't know how much of this is actually based on history. I know, for example, Vikings does actually take elements of real history in it, and obviously expands upon that. In regards to Knightfall, I'm not sure how much of this is real or how much is just complete, obviously, fabrication. But you know, what Landry does is really pretty bad. But we kind of we're painted to see him as the protagonist. But I'm sorry, I just simply don't agree with him, and he makes some really kind of poor choices, and you simply can't root for the guy. And the guy ultimately, on the flip side of that, who becomes the antagonist, I would say, you probably root for him. He doesn't seem like such a bad guy, and it's kind of, I mean, I wouldn't say he's a bad guy, but he is the antagonist, at least when we get towards the end of the season. But I feel he's probably completely justified in the way this kind of series depicts it. The other things, there's a whole bunch of other things that kind of annoy me about this season. We have one character that we're introduced for Parsifal, and he is just kind of like just a farm boy that ultimately gets kind of indoctrinated into the Knights Templar. And I got the impression that he was going to be our kind of like point of view character, because he's a kind of like new into this world, and ultimately, you know, I thought, okay, he is our entry into this kind of world of Knights Templar, so we can understand it from someone who is entering this world for the first time. But his storyline is literally buried halfway through the season. I'm thinking, why did we bother even having this character for the first half of this season? And it literally just stops. So a weird decision there. I mean, I guess in this time of conflict, stuff happens, but I didn't know why we spent so much time with him. And it kind of sets up continuing storylines with these Jewish characters that are in it, and that's all dropped. I mean, I don't know if anything will happen next season, but I don't see it, if I'm honest. The supporting characters, I would say, are actually kind of a little bit more interesting than some of the main characters for the most part, and that's a little bit of a shame. We have this kind of like this the Brotherhood of the Lights, which are this kind of like the Moors or something, and I don't know. Not a lot of it is explained to you. You get some questions answered, but others you don't. But you don't really know why certain alliances are kind of there. It's still hard to do that, spoilers. So I feel like this series asks a lot of questions and then it answers. And I guess the hook is to try and get you to watch next season and try and find out. But ultimately, it becomes a little bit unfulfilling because of that. Now, if you're a fan of history, you may know everything that happens here, but if you're watching the show and you're just watching it without all that prior knowledge, I feel that it doesn't really kind of do a good enough job of maybe keeping you as the viewer in the loop. But the main problem is, like I said, I feel they have a really weak leading man in regards to the way he is written. I mean, yeah, you know, he looks like Superman basically, great, but his character is pretty reprehensible, pretty incompetent, and really, you don't feel like you want to be following this guy. So it looks great. The fight scenes are very well staged. You know, it all looks very high budget and everything. But I feel the character work here and just the kind of the odd choices in regards to storytelling really makes this one not as interesting by any stretch of the imagination in regards to its contemporaries, Game of Thrones, Vikings, stuff like that. Even Spartacus, if you go back a few years now. So I've got to say, I'll give this series, this season 1, a 6 out of 10, and I feel like I'm being fairly generous, and that's really because of the aesthetics, if anything else. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.